Good afternoon. Oh, thanks, Dylan. Welcome back from lunch, and welcome back from what was, at least for me, an absolutely terrific morning of content and dialogue. I'm Karen Andres. I'm the Director of Inclusive Saving and Investing at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program, and I'll just give you a quick tip, which is maybe don't ski, and we'll move forward. And I'll try not to die getting back down the steps. So I just want to connect some dots for those of you who maybe weren't able to join us this morning. Something that I'm sitting with. I actually a week ago happened to be with my family in Kansas City, where the National World War I Museum is. And if you have not been to that museum, let me recommend that you book a trip to Kansas City post-haste. It is excellent. But as I stood there at the exhibition reading about all of the forces that were shaping the world in 1914, that explained what happened with World War I. And then this morning, when Dalip Singh ran through the exact same list of forces, it took my breath away, right? And then I was thinking, but wait, there's more. There are more forces that we are not talking about, and they're maybe a little bit less visible, right? They're not as flashy or headline grabbing as artificial intelligence, right? Or trade war, or increasing nationalism, isolationism. And I'm talking about the demographic trends that are increasingly going to be shaping our lives, our society, or societies, and our economy. And so, in particular, the trend of increasing longevity, which while we know is not equally or universally experienced, it is in fact dramatically changing the way human life works in the US and around the globe. And so I'm delighted to have a panel digging just into this topic. What are the economic sort of implications, consequences, and opportunities of increased longevity? And so I will, maybe not quickly, but exit the stage and invite Alice Park, Dylan Tyson, Anu Madgavkar, and Mike Hoden to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, everyone. I know it's tough right after lunch, but I promise you this is going to be a worthwhile conversation. So I cover health and medicine for Time, and I have been looking at this issue of longevity for a while now, the increasing life expectancy, primarily from the medical and health point of view. But recently I've been talking to geriatricians, epidemiologists, and it's very clear that this demographic shift, this aging of the world's population, it's not even around the world, but it is occurring pretty much all around the world, that this demographic shift really has implications far beyond health and far beyond medicine. It has implications for GDP, for economies, for workforces. So I'm really excited to be moderating this conversation today with these experts on stage here with me. And I'd like to start anew with you and look at this. We all know, we've heard for a long time now that life expectancy is increasing. People are living longer. But break it down for us. What are the forces? I know you at McKinsey have been diving pretty deeply into what this shift, this demographic shift means and what it looks like. What are some of the trends that you're seeing that are driving this increase of life expectancy?
Is it on? Yeah. Sure, Alice. Thanks for framing the topic, which is so important. I think from our standpoint, and I'm with the McKinsey Global Institute, so we look at things in terms of the long-term sort of economic drivers, but then also implications of big mega trends like demographics. And from our standpoint, it's truly a profound economic shift that the world is going to witness in the next, let's say, 2 decades. We're already in the middle of it. This is not something that we have to wait for it to unfold, but the effect, I think, will be very profound on economies and on all of the assumptions that underpin the way we think about economic growth, the way we think about sustaining the social contract. All of these things come into question. And the main driver of that happening is not really longevity. Longevity is not a problem. We celebrate the fact that we are living longer. The problem is when you think about age structure, it's youth scarcity that's the problem. Because it's that mix of younger versus older people that's going out of whack. And we really
So
trace...
this is also not only the increasing lifespan, but the decreasing birth rate,
It's
right?
decreasing fertility rates, birth rates. We say fertility not in the sense of an individual woman's infertility or anything like that, but for populations overall, 2/3 of the planet today live in countries where the average fertility rate is below replacement rate. It's as low as 1 in East Asia. It's about 1.4 to 1.6 in Western Europe and North America, but even countries like India are seeing it now at 1.9, and the replacement rate is 2.1. So all of these countries, unless something else changes, are heading for shrinking populations, and that mix of younger versus older people going out of whack. And when that happens, we will see something like 0.5 percentage point of per capita GDP growth vanishing simply because the age mix has changed, absent any other changes. And you also see the dependency ratio really rising. Currently, we have about 4 people available to support every retiree over the age of 65. That's going to shrink to 2 people in the coming 2 decades. So big, profound economic shifts that go back to, we start at the beginning, right? It really is birth rates that is kind of driving this imbalance.
And Mike, I want to turn to you next. So to really drive this point home, countries like Japan, they are speeding toward having 40% of their population in the over 65 category by 2060, which is not that far off. And many countries are really not that far behind. So you had the Global Coalition on Aging, and it was founded really to be the voice of, understanding economic pressures and forces that come with an aging population. What does it mean, as Anu said, to now have a discrepancy or to have that gap between the proportion of older people and younger people continue to grow? The idea, I think, traditionally has been that the younger working, quote unquote, working population would support, right, those who are older because they're in retirement and no longer productive. So that's kind of the traditional model. We're going to probably get to discussing, whether we need to evolve that a bit. But I wanted to ask you, so what does it mean when you've got a population that is primarily skewed toward 65 and older as far as, our social institutions?
Well, thank you. I'd open up with a few points that I hope will be particularly controversial, although it already reflects, I know what you suggested and what Alice said. So number one, we don't really think of this topic as 65 plus. 65 plus, as many of you will know, is the year that Otto von Bismarck picked back in 1888 when he was trying to get other principalities to join him in what became Germany. And he said, for those of you over 65, we'll give you pension and health benefits. Well, for the 2 people that were over 65 in 88, that was fine. It was also okay for the National Health Service in the late 40s. So we think of this older adult population, let's say roughly 50 plus. I mean, you could pick different numbers. And already, it's over 2 billion on the planet. We don't have exact numbers, doubling by mid-century. And that represents a marketplace that we've never really thought of. If you're a strategic planner in any major, certainly global company, but even national company, you will think of strategic planning in the sense of maybe, I remember in the 90s, the Hispanic community was all the rage. Or if you're a strategic planner inside a large company, you might say, how can I not be in China? There are, whatever it is today, 1.2, 1.3 billion people. Well, 2 billion on the planet over 50 should be thought of, no matter what sector you're in, as a market opportunity. The second point is the one you've already also alluded to, which is actually the greater impact on population aging, which is the trend we're thinking about, as Anu very clearly said, and as you suggested, Alice, is already the case in Japan, is low birth rates. We're depopulating globally, your point about India, I mean, we think of India as, the really poor people in India, the 600 or 700 million, are still making babies at a rate of 6, 7, or 8 per mother. But overall, they're under replacement right now. And because of that, the basic policies that we have, the basic policy infrastructure, certainly across the OECD countries, including Japan, including America, including Europeans, of healthcare, of education, of pension retirement, that were invented at best in the late 40s, in the 60s, so it's going on, 80 some years ago, are completely misaligned with today's population infrastructure. And so we need holistic reforms at the public policy level as well. So opportunities for a marketplace that never existed before, and public policy changes inside our infrastructure because of basically depopulation.
I'm glad you brought up the older population as consumers too, because I want to get to that and explore that. But before we do, Dylan, so we've now heard from Mike and Anu about these impending changes and the fact that we really aren't built, right? Our social institutions are really not built to sustain a population that's really skewed toward 50 plus. How do we support populations? Let's focus here on the U.S. How do we support those populations? We are, as Mike pointed out, our retirement plans, our pension plans are really not built for this. And as we see the replacement rate and the dependency ratio go up, we're not really financially, it's not financially sustainable. So how do we pay for an older population, a world with more older people?
Well, I think the key point
Small
is
question.
It is a small question, but if you break it down to size, what do you do when the world changes? You adjust, and recognizing just the profundity of this change and taking a moment to say, well, what does it imply? For us here in the United States, we've always had basically three stools of the retirement public policy apparatus, three legs of the stool. I mean. One was Social Security, or kind of the safety net. Two was employer-based plans, and three was savings. And so, as we think about that, it will be important that Social Security is something that we, as a country, adjust to and to figure out exactly how we ensure its long-term solvency. Where, from a private sector standpoint, though, I believe what we can do is recognize that the traditional defined benefit pension plans that are rolling away need to be supplanted by the worthy successor that's already there, which is our 401k plans or the 403b plans. But what hasn't, and that needed to change because people don't just go and stay in one job for an entire time. Sometimes people will pine and say, well, I wish we could have DB plans like in the good old days. Well, the good old days didn't cover everyone in the first place. And it certainly didn't admit for the fact that people were going to be changing jobs a lot more frequently. And so the issues of portability were really important. And you can't just take the final average 5 years of someone's salary as the way to create that defined benefit. So if you look through and say, what really are the aspects of a private sector pension plan that you need to have, you need to ensure that people can contribute early and often over time. We've made many improvements in terms of some of the legislative changes, Secure 1 and Secure 2.0, which have helped us to contribute more, to have that escalate, to have the right kind of asset liability matching and the like. So that's good. But what we haven't yet done is admitted that the whole purpose of a pension is to provide a pension. Right? The whole purpose of a pension is to provide income that lasts for a lifetime, because that longevity pooling overall is what's going to be able to create higher levels of retirement income for the folks that are living much longer. These are risks that we can't kind of take on our own. And obviously, that then has to be fit together with good retail wealth, IRA and how that works is important too, because most people look at their portfolios as a whole. So from a public policy standpoint, it's making sure that each of the legs of the stool, a strong Social Security, an involved and evolving private sector pension plans that includes as a hallmark auto income, meaning that is just a natural thing that starts, and that we have support for savings just in general.
Do you see, if, as we're seeing, as Anu pointed out, we're seeing fewer working people available. I think all of you have noted this, to support older people as we have more and more people living longer. How do we see that breakdown of that three-legged stool? Is it no longer sort of even? Do we need to really focus, perhaps shift our focus away from perhaps Social Security and rely less on that and really look at more policies that would, encourage employer or individual saving type plans? I knew you're nodding. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it really does come to a very specific framing of that. What are the options really on the table?
Or
right?
for different options for different people, right?
Yeah,
like in terms of.
But even thinking about this first at a macro level, there's definitely much need for policy-enabled and innovation-enabled sort of retirement products and the like. But if you step back and think about today, the average person who's above 65 years old in the United States has what we call a kind of senior gap, right? Senior gap is sort of the consumption is in excess of the labor income of that person, because as Michael said, people kind of ease back and drop out of the labor force. They're not earning labor income, but consumption actually goes on rising. It's not that consumption levels of older people drop.
So they're not changing their consumption patterns even if their income changes.
The mix definitely changes. More healthcare, more housing, less education, and less other things. But that's a 60,000 per capita gap, which if the age structure shifts and you have a lot more people in that bucket, absent any other changes, it's like imposing an additional, let's say, tax burden of 10 percentage points on the labor income of the economy overall. So think about it as, regardless of how the transfers work, or regardless of how the flows are structured, at a macroeconomic level, that's 10 percentage points more of economic surplus that's going to be needed to support this consumption, unless something changes. So either you have to have more older people engaged in the workforce after the age of 50, not stepping back, or you need to have much more productivity of people who do work. So this is a real opportunity to double down on saying we need more automation, we need more productivity. But neither of these things, I think, on their own are going to be able to square the circle. We're going to need a combination of higher productivity, more hours spent in the workforce, potentially at least sustaining levels of immigration, because that has helped the United States population and age structure over time. A combination of these things, and then the innovation that's going to be required to get that balance. To your question, today about 50% of this senior gap in the US is funded through public resources. In Europe, this is as high as maybe 80%. And you really have to think about what that mix or pattern of the future could look like.
So that's 50%, but as we all know, I think if the last time I looked at these numbers, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Social Security Retirement Trust is set to be insolvent in 7 years, correct? So clearly that 50% is not going to cut it.
and therefore the need to come back to questions about productivity and labor force participation really is.
Right. So I want to come back to productivity, but Mike, before that, Anu also mentioned that the spend for people 50 plus shifts a little bit, and it goes more toward healthcare too. So the other thing we're seeing and we're hearing about with this longevity and extended lifespan is health span, right? And the fact that not only are people living longer, but hopefully living healthier. So one of the things that we see as people get older is the increased need to spend on healthcare, health needs. what are we seeing as far as innovations there to really perhaps focus a little more? And a lot of those costs are toward chronic diseases, things that we do have some interventions for, and are able to manage if we do it right and if we intervene early enough. What advances or, are we moving in the right direction for focusing a little more on prevention as we see the population get older to ensure that by the time people are 50 plus, they're healthier and hopefully going to be spending less on healthcare than previous generations?
That's a big question also, but let me...
I only ask small, big questions.
I'll take pieces of it, and also related to the earlier discussion that Anu and Dylan were just having. One is in those societies, Japan, Singapore, Finland, which are the oldest among us on the planet, percentage of old to young, we're already seeing what is being referred to out in Asia as unretirement. So, people are coming back to work. But you can only do that if you're healthy enough to do it. That's assuming you even want to. I think, and maybe connecting some of the dots that Anu was making, I think one of the most interesting and visible points we've seen over the last couple years, the IMF's 2025 Outlook Report. So this is the International Monetary Fund, not the WHO, for example. And they said, this was a few months ago, basically we see a number of economic headwinds around the world. The next 5 to 7 years could be challenging. One of those headwinds is the aging of society. And we have two answers to that. This was in the IMF report. One is people need to work longer. And the second is we need to spend more on preventive health and health promotion in order to keep people healthier so they can work longer. If you try to get someone at age 83 who's got early onset Alzheimer's, it's not going to help very much. We want to help that person, but you need to get at a place where we really make a difference in the quote-unquote the diseases of aging, as you were suggested. And what we're learning from a scientific point of view as well is that there's a lot of connection in our bodies among, quote-unquote, the diseases of aging. It's not surprising that you see cardiovascular, osteoporosis, diabetes, and ultimately brain diseases like Alzheimer's, and all of it connected to inflammation in the microbiome. So I do have a PhD after my name, but it's in political science. So what I'm telling you is what I've learned, not what I know. But what we're seeing in this health space in innovation is utterly stunning. We're on the cusp of another revolution, thank God. One of our public policy elements need to be to support that innovation, which we're doing pretty well here in America. Many of our European friends are not doing very well. But addressing the diseases of aging as a kind of holistic approach is what we're now beginning to see. GLP-1s is a very interesting example of that, which was not invented for that purpose, but we're finding Novo Nordisk, many of you may know, the Danish-based global pharma healthcare company is doing some very interesting studies in relationship between GLP-1s and Alzheimer's, and they're beginning to find a lot of interesting research. So we're on the cusp of it, but spending on investing in preventive health, which starts when we're young, can also be when we're 50 or 60 or 70, but it certainly starts when we're young. It's about medicine, but it's also about healthier food and diet and all the other stuff you'd imagine. That is the key to this current, unlocking this current challenge of population aging, I would suggest.
And I think the issue, though, is, having covered healthcare for a long time, is that those conversations, that prevention focus is really not incentivized in our current healthcare system, which is very reactionary. You go see a doctor when you're sick, when you've got a symptom. Preventive care is all about helping that person not get a symptom to begin with. And we're, our current healthcare system is just not built for that financially. It's just not incentivized that way. But I think as we see, but it's interesting as we consider now this aging population, and the potential, as Anu pointed out, the potential of looking at increased healthcare costs, then perhaps this will finally be the catalyst that will help us to really prioritize prevention over reactionary medicine. I want to jump now to something, Anu, that you brought up, which is productivity.
So just on that point, if I could just jump in for a second. So I would argue, and please feel free to disagree anywhere, but I would argue that the three major elements that led to what Anu, I think correctly, referred to as the miracle of longevity we are now living with in our 21st century is, number one, the antibiotic revolution of the late 50s, 60s, childhood immunization, and the scaling of sanitation globally. Shifting to today, in order to get healthier longevity and allow a 78-year-old to keep working if she wants to, is adult immunization. We've also got some challenges in antibiotics, which, if you want to go into later, and continuing the scaling of sanitation. But, how do we get this longevity we are currently living with to a healthier longevity? And it's investing in early detection and diagnosis of oncology, cardiovascular, and investing in adult immunization, we would suggest.
I totally agree. And so I do want to jump now to productivity, because one of the things, too, that I think as we look at an aging world, one of the things that can help to address this issue of who pays for it and who supports it, like you said, is if we have people working longer, if they can. And I think I've read some surveys recently showing that most people do. If you ask people 65 and older if they wanted to continue working or retire, many say that if they can, they will continue working. It may not be full time, and so we may need to rethink what that employment looks like. But that opens up the question of maybe we really need to rethink what employment overall looks like. As Mike pointed out in his opening comments, the ideas that we have now of education really front-loaded toward the beginning of life, then you work for a few decades, and then you retire, were really built in, the kind of post-World War era and in the Industrial Revolution, when life expectancy really didn't extend beyond 60s, 70s, maybe 80s if you were lucky. And that's very different today. That looks very different today. So maybe employment, work, and the workforce isn't, age 20 to 60 or whatever it is, and it doesn't stop there, but maybe it's something that people dip in and out of throughout their lifetimes. Maybe it's education is the same way. Maybe it's not front-loaded in your 20s and you're done, but something that people come in and out of and perhaps pursue several degrees over a lifetime, several different careers over a lifetime. Anu, I'm wondering what you're seeing as far as data on looking at this, and whether this is something that, I know there's some very interesting programs where continuing education, of course, is one of these, but how do we make that more standard?
Sure. So I think the good news is that, if you think about the curve of labor intensity over the life cycle, that's a sort of inverted or upside down U-shaped curve, right? It starts dropping off after the age of 50, and that's pretty much in every economy that we looked at. The good news, however, is that over time, this curve at the older end of it has shifted outwards and upwards. So there are economies where people have continued to be active in the workforce well beyond 50, and you can actually see between maybe 10 and 15 percentage points of increase in labor participation post that age. Most of that, or the most sort of striking examples of that, have been where policy has spurred or forced those kinds of changes. So pension reforms, linking pensions to kind of older points in time where you can start encashing them, or linking them to being active in the workforce. So countries like Italy or Germany or Japan have put in place policies that have actually spurred older people to stay more engaged. So that's kind of one almost non-negotiable, let's say, leg to the three-legged stool to make this happen. But the second part of it is, I think, different ways to engage older people and tap into them and even sort of make it attractive for them to think about coming back into work. In Japan, for example, a lot of the older age sort of centers where people congregate are have dual purposes. It's not just recreation, but they are recreation and recruitment centers where employers actually come and look amongst older cohorts to attract them in. Or you've had, even in the United States, you've had very targeted programs in the life sciences space where older workers have a lot of expertise and you really want to empanel them in some shape or form not to lose that expertise. In the pharmacy business where you typically have an older demographic as your customer base and therefore you are attracting them as, be not just customers but also come in and work part-time as part of our retail network. So there we are seeing more innovation on the private employer side of things as well to engage people. And there's a whole separate set of opportunities around learning. We should probably come back to that, but would love for the others to chip in on the employment side of things as well.
Okay. Dylan, I wonder if you could pick up on that. And what are you seeing from employers? Are you seeing a lot of impetus and sort of drive from employers to really look at the workforce? I know a lot of social scientists have talked about the wasting human capital. If we're not really optimizing people who are older and just retiring them, and assuming that they're done and no longer able to be productive and contribute to either the workforce or to society. What kind of perspective are you seeing from employers as far as their willingness to explore perhaps some innovative programs or ways to include and incorporate more older people, either part-time, as mentors, whatever it might be? What are you seeing out in the industry right now?
Well, from my perspective, the willingness and the desire is clearly there to be inclusive, to be able to do that, but you have to put this in to say, how is that company winning in the marketplace? What are the strategies that can be pulled in so that it's competitive advantage and not accommodation? And I think we need to even check ourselves because how we look at things from a commercial or a professional standpoint really starts with how we see the world overall. And I've been surprised, I've talked to a lot of people about retirement, and if you say the word retirement, let me ask you, what comes first to your mind? Is it a positive connotation? Is it a negative connotation? Do you think about it personally? Do you think about the societal trends overall? How about from a business standpoint? To me, there's so much stuff packed into this phrase that we really have to kind of say, first of all, what is that conception? If there is a retirement, that's kind of built on the idea that you worked a thing, you get to this great time, it's the gold watch, you go, and I think we're all saying that time doesn't exist anymore, yet there's not a successor word to retirement, really. I've heard things like refirement, rewirement, they all strike me as a little bit too cute to be able to move on, but there's something here. And there's also something to say, like from a business standpoint, boy, I haven't really been seeing the Keynesian promise of working less and less hours to be able to spend time on leisure as productivities come up. And if anything, that kind of concentration or talent density has worked against that. So to me, we're going to have to figure out how do we bridge that because the math is inescapable. One thought that I've had, and I don't really know all the way what to do with it yet, but I'd share it with you and be interested in your reflections too. You hear so much concern about AI and what it's going to do to jobs, so there are no jobs anymore, and people can't do that, and I get that. I think it's equally plausible to say, boy, this AI stuff really better work, because if we're going from 4 people supporting each aged person, 65 and older, to half of that, 2 people supporting each person that's aged. The folks that are there are going to need ways to be more productive. And my hope also is that with that technological layer, that we can have competition that pull people in later and later in their lives to be able to be doing meaningful work. The last point that I'll make is, and this again is just a reflection, but I think work's not really always only about money. In fact, maybe it's only partially about money. It's a lot about social connection with your coworkers and intellectual stimulation. And for sure, those are the kinds of things that, as people are at point of retirement, they're thinking about equally relative to just the financial picture of it as well.
So let's get a little more granular about that. We're hearing a lot, some employers are exploring reskilling, retraining of employees so that, you can take advantage of people with more experience. Their continued work as they get older may not look exactly like the years that they've accomplished. But what are the economic incentives for businesses to reskill employees, to hold on to those employees whom, they have invested some time and resources into for training and they've helped them to build up that level of experience. Are there incentives there? Do we need policy changes? Mike, you look like you've got something to say.
There are two sides. One is the policy changes, but there's a lot that individual companies can do in their own interest. A couple examples. Some of you may know, a few years ago, BMW, based in Germany, as we know, in their Bavaria plant, which is one of their, Bavaria, which is originally where Bismarck, so coming full circle, they didn't have enough people to, they were going to close down the plant. And many of their older workers, this is about 15 or 20 years ago, got together and said, why don't you keep it open, but change a few things. Reduce the amount of time we will work every day. Reduce the amount of increments of time we work, so 2 hours at a time, not 8 hours at a time. Change the floor so it's not concrete, it's softer, it's easier for us. A lot of other things. They wound up doing that and retaining older workers, which were into their 60s and 70s. And then when they started measuring the productivity and the value of that plant against others around the world, it skyrocketed because the knowledge, the ideas, the experience that these older workers had, when something happened on the assembly line, which it inevitably will do, they knew what to do about it, and in a couple of minutes it was corrected. Where there were plants where there were mainly 20s and 30s working, the plant would be shut down for 2 days, so they'd have to figure out the change. So there's a lot of incentives like that that one could look at. The other point I'll make is that, to start young. And I just have two examples, Google and Shutterstock. Apparently, both have companies where there was an, quote-unquote, an older adult employee resource group. And in both cases, older adult by that standard was 40 plus. It was obviously the exact.
It's Google.
But you know what? They have this older adult employee resource group at both companies. I know Google still does. I'm not sure about Shutterstock. I think they do. And, they're going to apply and learn lessons starting in the 40s and 50s that, many of us will have to figure out in the 60s and 70s. And you need it at both ends. And I think there's an awful lot that companies can do that don't have to wait for the public policy change, though those incentives can help on the tax side and the kind of things you were referring to, Dylan.
I knew Mike brought up a great point, which is this idea of having, I think there are studies showing that companies that incorporate intergenerational teams tend to have better outcomes, higher productivity. Can you tell us a little bit about that research and what that's showing, where you can combine both, kind of the energy and the innovation of younger generations with the experience, like he was saying, and you bring them, it's like best of both worlds, right?
I think it's very much so, but also it goes way beyond what incentives are needed to make these kinds of structures happen, because it's beyond incentives, because it is an imperative, right? It is a must-do if I have to survive, to reskill your workforce in line with what technology is enabling and the changes that technology will bring. Part of that will be intergenerational teams, but it's frankly also teaming up with all sorts of hybrid workers that will span, a robotic workforce or an agentic workforce on the AI side. And you're going to have workers who need to kind of be able to interface and learn how to work in this new environment. Now, this could play to the advantage of the whole idea of teaming and pairing, or the whole idea of tapping into older workers and their wealth of experience. Because what's happening with technology is that the user interface is getting easier. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. The technology is more advanced, but everyone's going to have to use it, and our ability to interact with it is actually going to become easier. My 85-year-old mother is today troubleshooting her phone by chatting with an AI agent, and tells me that the agent is much more polite and patient than I am with her when she's lost her contact list like for the 50th time, right? So it's easy to do that, and therefore even people who are in their 50s or 60s or 70s will be able to find ways to channel and harness their domain knowledge.
They won't
their
be
judgment.
shut out anymore, I think, which is what technology is traditionally.
Yeah. They will find ways. And I frankly worry more about people entering the workforce and not finding those entry-level jobs and the first rung on the ladder, because their ability to build that experience is getting impaired. Whereas people who are kind of mature in organizations already have experience and will find it easier to kind of apply that in the context of AI and technology.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to
I
say
can
something.
keep going, but
Okay. No, feel free. Go ahead.
I was just waiting. I know we want to get questions.
Yes, we do. So I am going to open up to the audience for questions in a few minutes. But before I do, I wanted to ask each one of you, and maybe we can go down the line, about how can we ensure that the benefits of longevity, productivity, increased productivity, people want to work longer, continue to contribute to society. How can we ensure that they are equitably distributed? Because clearly there's a danger of seeing these benefits really go, and the health span benefits, right, really go to only those who can afford them. So are we, are there policies that are urgently needed right now as we face, this demographic shift, and how can we ensure that these benefits and that we are equitably distributing, the human capital that we have in older people, and that employers are taking advantage of, that people will be able to take advantage of it, that they'll be able to have the savings that they want, as they get older and pay for the things that they want?
Well, I don't think we should worry about that. I think we should let the market operate, and the market will, what we all know, the market will reward the good things, and it will go against those that aren't working. And, little by little, you will see companies that will have observed the benefit of what BMW did, for example, and others will hopefully start to model that. And where they don't, they won't succeed. The one thing where I'd come out here, which is what Karen, I think, opened with, is that this is, I would suggest, the most profound and significant megatrend of our time, which is least sort of addressed or understood. And, so much of it is about it's not about aging, it's because of aging. And therefore, you reframe it, not so much what are we going to do about an 88-year-old, but how does it have an impact on economic growth and fiscal sustainability? And so it comes back to your question. I say the market will give us the trends and the directions.
So as we see an older population, as Anu said, they continue to spend, and those consumers will drive the policies and the needs that society will respond with. Okay. Anu, your thoughts on that?
I would tend to agree with Michael, and I also feel from our research that the most effective or the biggest university, so-called, on the planet is companies or organizations that employ people, because the human capital building actually happens through the process of learning on the job, trying new things, going from one role to another, building up your skills. And it's that vibrancy or dynamism in the labor market that we must cherish, because that's really at the heart of economic mobility and human capital building. So to the extent that policies come in the way of investment, dynamism, and innovation, I would say those policies are the ones we should be thinking of addressing. At the end of the day, this has to be about economic dynamism and creating opportunity for productive work. There's no substitute for that, really.
Dylan?
The ability for technological advances to enable inclusion in a way that is deeper, I think are some of the key tools that will allow private sector companies to be able to push forward, and so too with governmental bodies. I think we really have to make sure that we've got that right logic, because it can help change the mindset that we've got. It's a whole lot easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. And so the idea of saying, how do we be inclusive? How do we pull this through, and to ensure that we've got the right kinds of incentives from the market to be able to push that forward. I think when we start to see best practices, those will be quickly adopted.
Alice, if I may, I just wanted to interject. We've talked a lot about the context in developed countries, or the US in particular. But for a moment, if you look at the developing world, they are confronting these challenges at a much earlier stage in their development journey. Most of these countries have less than a generation, or maybe one generation at most, before they hit the age mix or the age profile of advanced economies. But their per capita incomes are 20% or maybe 30% at most, right, of what a rich country is. And so this whole idea to say, what can they do to sort of accelerate economic growth and prosperity growth, while being mindful of be careful what you promise. You can't promise a sort of retirement structure that's just not sustainable. And so policymakers in those countries are going to have to think hard about how do you accelerate surplus creation as opposed to making promises that we can't keep.
And I've read a lot of experts who say that perhaps even those countries may be leading us, and we may be looking to them, as you said, because they are really confronting this at a much faster pace, and are really more aware, I think, of the pressures of their changing demographics. Okay, so I'd love to open up now to the audience if anyone has any questions for our wonderful panelists here. I think there are mics running around. Yes, there's one there. We'll start there and then come to you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the conversation. Seema Agnani, I'm with National Capacity Coalition of Asian American, Asian Pacific Islanders in Community Development. We had a campaign for a while around the earned income tax credit for it to be, for older workers to be eligible. What we found within our community is that there's a much higher rate of elderly that are working longer, and we're pushing for the expansion. As part of that, also small business owners, where do small business owners fit in, and what are the solutions for those that are running the very small, the micro businesses, really, the Main Street businesses in our communities? What are the solutions for them that you see outside? The earned income tax credit is one solution we were thinking of, but are there others that, I feel like a lot of the conversation that I've heard today assumes that people are working for a larger company or have a salary pension, but a large portion of the economy is made up of small micro businesses who don't have access to those.
Yeah, and that's true. It's a great question, and that's true everywhere on the planet. And I really like the idea of tax policy as powering economic activity. Everything, at least that I said, I'm sure my colleagues as well, was meant to apply to entrepreneurs anywhere or workers anywhere. And there are a lot of really interesting programs under the auspices of the age-friendly cities and communities framework, which provide the incentives for entrepreneurs and, the guy who's selling pizza up in the Bronx, for example.
I think that's the programs that you mentioned. It started with the WHO, the Age-Friendly Cities, and I think New York is actually one of them. And if you look on their websites, they do have some very interesting proposals and programs, so it might be a great place to start. I think there was a question here, too.
Hi, I have a request and a question. My name is Pete Kasseback. I'm with New Jersey Future, based down in Trenton, New Jersey. The request is if each of the panelists could just say where you're coming from, which organization. I didn't hear that earlier. That would be helpful. And the question is, you've talked about preventative health and how important that is, but what do you see the role of the built environment in helping to create that runway for people to help encourage preventative health? And should we be focusing on that as well?
Okay, Global Coalition on Aging, which is about 20 plus global companies. You're right, though we do work with local entrepreneurs everywhere. And I would give a similar answer as the last point on age-friendly cities and communities. Built community, architecture. We have something called the Silver Economy Forum. I think Karen and KC are going to be with us in Manchester, UK in a couple weeks. And what they're doing in Manchester around housing, around the relationship between engineering, architecture, and building, and age-friendly environments to enable healthier aging is really, really interesting. If you come to Manchester, we have a couple site visits that will be precisely on those points.
And again, I think the New York City, Age-Friendly City, has some very interesting proposals. Like, for example, the one that sticks to my mind is they've removed gravel pathways in parks, for example, to make it safer for people either using canes or in wheelchairs, or those who have a more unsteady gait, as well as ramps and things like that. So yes, I think that's a big part.
Or strollers.
And slopes, right, exactly. Okay, so do you want to go down the line, I think, and where you're from?
Sure. The McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economics and business research arm of McKinsey and Company. I'm not an expert on architecture or urban design, but I think any kind of design that incentivizes or motivates walking as a mode of transport is a really healthy long-term bet with very high ROI in terms of public health outcomes.
And my name is Dylan Tyson. I work at Prudential right here in town. I've been here for 30 years. I run our retirement strategies business and lead our global retirement COE, Center of Excellence. In terms of the built environment, clearly so important, like how this space shapes the way that we feel. And I think no matter whether you're old or young, it's a key and central portion of that. The way that we're integrated into these sorts of things are by making promises that will provide lifetime income, for example, where we take in premium and then pay and then effectively pool the longevity risk over time and make those promises. But what's important relative to your built environment question is then how do we invest the money? A key portion of that is making private investments into commercial real estate, senior housing, things like that. And so you really wind up with a virtuous private cycle on that overall. And the best investments that are ones that simultaneously allow things that otherwise couldn't get financed to get financed more effectively, and to create and to be a tailwind to the new kinds of things that are happening. Thanks for reminding us that we failed to introduce ourselves. I'm embarrassed.
That's my fault, probably. I assumed everyone had their little programs with them, so my bad. Any other questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. It was really helpful to just understand your perspectives, especially in this moment in this space. Rachel Wilson, I'm a strategic advisor for Zane Ventures out of Atlanta, representing helping and investing into Southeast companies, supporting the healthy human economy, especially longevity. So my question is around food access and prevention. There is a lot of challenges with people getting access to food, food being a really good resource for helping with people to live longer, better lives. I'd love to get you guys all take on food as medicine, food as nutrition, and some of these trends in terms of how food can be really helpful, especially for age and place, and a lot of the work that you do as well, Michael.
Maybe I'll just share one little anecdote relative to where we are right now. I don't know if you've noticed on the main street here, Broad Street, there is a Whole Foods that is there. This was seen in Newark as a food desert, and part of what Prudential has done, just as we've been here for 150 years, this is our home. We were founded by John Dryden on Broad Street. So kind of the idea of being able to go and to say, in these little ways, we can lead to help build that up. It all starts from the premise that we agree with you. This is very important. If you don't have access to healthy food, if you don't have the tools around you, it's hard to thrive as a community as much as you might like to. And I really do believe that it's a partnership between the government here in Newark and the community leaders, the folks that call Newark their home, and then the residents, and so we take that very very seriously. And so I just wanted to call that out because so many people in our company have dedicated a lot of time to being able to support that and to have Newark really be the beautiful city that it is.
Again, it's not an area I've studied in detail, but I do know that there are very profound and deep linkages between healthy aging and food composition. And what that means is some of the revolutions in dietary habits which have been enabled by science and technology and rising productivity in agriculture and the abundance of grain or protein that we've seen, over the decades around the world, they've been very positive to ensure calorie sufficiency and macronutrient sufficiency. But I think with this dramatic shift in population and age mix that we're likely to see, we're probably going to need some pretty profound changes in the way we incentivize food production and the technology of food, right, to address some of the, let's say, unintended consequences of the big productivity improvements that we've seen in the food business over the decades.
Well, I'll also refer to a project that Global Coalition on Aging has supported by Novartis, one of our companies, called Engage with Heart in Baltimore. And it's basically built on the relationship with African American churches and age-friendly, the Baltimore age-friendly community, similar to what is in New York, as you said. The centerpiece of this is essentially people of, particularly the underserved community of Baltimore, having a sense of trust in those who are giving the information to behave differently around food, around other things like exercise, obviously, medicines, and learning. It's from trust to engagement to basically compliance. And how does one learn to comply better with a healthy kind of regimen, whatever that is? The earlier the better, but most of the people in the program are actually in their 70s and 80s and early 90s. And we're seeing a lot of really interesting results. Early days, but it's a community health delivery program that I think is a little different than others because it is based on this element of trust, and the metric ultimately is basically compliance or adherence, including to healthier foods. Atlanta was we looked at about 150 cities around the country. Atlanta was one of the 4, ultimately Baltimore won, but we're actually thinking about going to Atlanta, so we'll contact you.
More to come.
Nice deal making right here. Some nice deal making right here.
Okay, I think we might have time for one last quick question, if there is one. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. My name is Boomi. I'm with the Aspen Institute. My question is about caregiving. So I feel like you can't talk about this issue without talking about the people who care for the folks who we want to live better and longer. So what's your what have you been seeing in terms of supporting, maybe in new ways, the folks who are actually working and taking care of an older parent or looking after an older parent and looking after little ones and trying to build their career at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of research around tracking, how people move through their careers over 10, 15, or 20 years, and the differences, frankly, between men and women in terms of how that happens. And it's really very stark that the caregiving responsibility, both for younger people but also older people, that falls on the shoulders of women, end up with career, let's say, trajectories or roles and career choices that people make, which are so starkly different, and end up with roughly, I think, $500,000 of lifetime value differentials between an average professional man's career and woman's career, right? So the question is spot on. There is a huge amount of latent human capital that's not being fully utilized or fully productive because of care. And I think from an economic standpoint, the solution has to be in marketizing more of the care in some shape or form, right? Whether that's paid for through public funding or whether that's paid for through private resources is a different question. But more of the work that's done in the unpaid realm of things needs to become work that's recognized, where the economic value is recognized in some shape or form, and we can put a value to it and figure out then how to make it kind of more productive, more accessible, and all of those things. When it stays in the unpaid realm, it's not measured, and nobody really is looking at it as a cost or a burden or an opportunity cost of any kind.
I think there's also a broader way of looking at caregiving. I think in Europe, particularly in Germany, there's some innovative ideas of intergenerational housing units where you've got different families living together and they're intentionally, seniors, families with young children, singles, young couples without children yet. And the idea there is to really sort of be a community, to go back to this idea of a community where, the older people, if they're able, are taking care of or babysitting for the younger kids while their parents are at work, and vice versa. And if the older people do need care, then the younger folks are able to kind of step in and drive them to their doctor's appointments or go grocery shopping for them. So I think it's interesting that not only do we need to do this, putting a dollar amount on that care and recognizing it as a job, as an occupation, but to think more broadly and more innovatively and creatively about what that means, as we have a society that's increasingly going to have older people, how do we incorporate them and just not marginalize them, which is currently what's happening, I think, in a lot of the world.
And the point about caregiving, Prudential has a close partner in the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, which really celebrates the contribution of the hidden heroes that are the caregivers to mill vets and the like. And one of the things that has been progress is to make sure that just because care is provided by a family member, that it would be recognized in the same way and provided for in the same way as if it was a third party in this. And so just finding the little things that get in the way and recognizing that none of us lives alone, that all of us are part of a community, and that we just keep trying to improve step by step, I think so important. Really appreciate you bringing that up.
So maybe I'll just round
Close
that out.
Close us out.
First of all, yes, thank you, and I think it's on us that we spent an hour without actually referring to caregiving. It is one of the 3 platforms that Global Coalition on Aging has. I would say a few quick things about it. One is, when we talk about productivity, employers, again, whether it's the pizza guy, in the Bronx who has 3 employees, and one of whom could be a caregiver, or a huge global corporation based in Newark or wherever, caregiving is a major piece of 21st century workforce productivity. And we tend to do it really, really poorly. And there are a few companies that have actually gotten into it. Some of you may know Home Instead. It's probably the most successful global company based out of Omaha, Nebraska, franchise model around the world, recently bought by Silicon Valley technology Honor, who are trying to put through technology efficiencies and value to the human touch of caregiving. We'll see if they succeed. In America and many European countries, caregiving is the third fastest growing sector, and it's going to only explode. So it's also a place to make money.
All right, on that note, I know we could keep going. This is such a rich topic, but I do want to thank Dylan, Anu, and Mike for sharing your thoughts and being here today. Appreciate it.